World of Tanks is a weird game played by equally weird people, so it should come as no surprise that it has some weird history to it. I took it upon myself to find some of the weirdest and most obscure facts about this game because I thought it would be cool. I will start with some common knowledge about this game, facts that most of you probably are familiar with, but new players might not know about, such as the well-known fact that artillery is unfair and broken. World of Tanks was developed by Russians. Well, to be more accurate, Wargaming, the company that owns World of Tanks, is based in Cyprus. This is where the Russian bias myth originates from. World of Tanks used to have team damage. In fact, it still does in Clan Wars.
Oh, now you're blue! No!
Basically, if you shot your teammate too many times, you would turn blue. And if you were blue, your team can shoot you back without penalty. If you were blue and continued to team kill, you would be banned for 1 whole hour. If you got back on and started team killing again, it would extend to 3 days, a week, and then a month, and then a permaban. Though these strikes would expire relatively quickly, so you'd pretty much always get just a 1 hour ban. What a fantastic system it was back then. On top of that, you would not get banned for shooting your platoon mate because Wargaming understands what humor is. Well, at least back then they did. World of Tanks had all chat. You could talk to the enemy team. You might know this from team training rooms, which still has all chat. Wargaming removed it because, one in every 1,000 games, someone would be giving away your location to the enemy team. And, instead of banning the person who was giving away your position, say through a ticket system like we already have, Wargaming decided to just remove it. A great use of all chat was to trick the enemy team as to the whereabouts of yourself or a teammate. For example, you could tell the enemy team that you're in a tricky part of the map to reach and watch them fail to get you. Yeah, that's right. In old World of Tanks, there were tricky parts of the map you could reach, known as climbs or mountain goating. If you had enough speed and drove up the right angles, you could reach almost any part of the map. Wargaming didn't seem to care at the time since it was so rare for someone to actually make a climb in a pub. But then wheeled lights came out and Wargaming realized that wheeled lights could pretty much go anywhere they wanted with very little difficulty. So now all the maps have invisible walls everywhere. Before this, some of the best climbs were on Mines, Mountain Pass, and Sacred Valley, and there were a few more. Although these climbs were pretty overpowered in specific circumstances, I can't help but miss the joy of finally getting a climb right and seeing what the enemy team says about you in chat when you're on top of the world. Along with this, World of Tanks used to have a simpler physics engine, where tanks could not flip. They were locked at 70 degrees in freefall, making it much easier to climb without the risk of flipping. Another common fact is that there used to be much more low tiers in the game, but Wargaming decided it was confusing and redundant to have so many crappy low tier tanks that nobody cares about, so they removed a bunch and created the Collectors tab, and that's where they all sit now. They also removed a few high tier tanks from the tech tree, such as the AMX-30B and T62A. Along with this change, they buffed a lot of low tier tanks' hit points to help new players survive longer. This made a bunch of losers mad because they could no longer one-shot new players in their M4 Sherman. So, Wargaming added the T6 Medium, which basically did the same thing, just a tier lower. Some other facts include that if all your crew dies in a tank, you die, even if you still have health. Tank destroyers back in the day had 850 alpha damage, not 750. They also had a camo bonus when firing, meaning that they don't lose much camo after firing, so they're basically invisible when shooting at you, like a sturv. Wargaming realized this was pretty overpowered, so they nerfed all the TDs, but they didn't touch the E25 and SU-12244, because they're premiums, of course. The Panzer B2 is the only tank with super pref. It is a tier 4 that only sees up to tier 4s. And, that's some interesting facts that you probably already know about, but let's move on. Here where we talk about some more obscure facts that you might still know but probably forgot about. You may know about some of the tech tree tanks being moved to the collector's tab, but there were a lot more tanks that were just flat out removed or changed. I will quickly recap some of the recent changes. The SU-12254 was a tier 9 tank destroyer with the Object 430's gun, and it kinda sucked. The Object 263 used to be a tier 10 with great DPM and gun handling. It was moved to tier 9 and nerfed to oblivion. The Tiger P used to lead to the VK4502A, which led to the 4502B, then the Mouse. There was no Panzer VII. Light tanks used to stop at tier 8, and usually branched to a medium tank line. For example, the T49 used to be at tier 8 and led to the T54E1. Some older accounts, such as my own, have the T54E1 unlocked, while the T69 is still unresearched. That's because the light tanks were changed, now they lead to tier 10 light tanks, which suck ass if you didn't already know. Light tanks used to get +3, -1 matchmaking, opposed to the +or -2 matchmaking currently. So like a Bulldog, an M41 Bulldog, back when it had the amazing autoloader and it was fun to play, could see tier 10s as the tier 7, but could never see tier 5s, and it was arguably in a better state than it is now. If we go back even further, the tech tree was even weirder. For example, the IS-4 was a tier 9 that led to the IS-7. When the line split and the IS-4 was moved to tier 10, anybody who researched the IS-4 but never played it would have to play with the IS gun from tier 7 because they would have never played the ST-1 and thus never unlocked the M62 T2 gun. That meant you had 175mm of penetration at tier 10. Yikes. The Object 430 used to be a tier 10 medium, with the best DPM in the game at 320 alpha. Wargaming moved it to tier 9 and added the 430U because they're just really bad at designing tank lines, I don't know. The T30 used to be a tier 10 American heavy tank. Wargaming moved it to tier 9 and made it into a tank destroyer after the E5 was added. The T34 used to be a tier 9 heavy, then they moved it to tier 8 and they made it a premium. So if you had the T34 when it was just a tech tree tank, you basically got a free premium tank. The KV-1 and KV-2 used to be the same tank at tier 5. It was called the KV and was basically a KV-2 with a 107mm at tier 5. So, busted. Before high tier light tanks were in the game, so this is before like the Bulldog and the T49 and all those, most of them stopped at tier 5. And those tier 5s could meet tier 10 vehicles. Wargaming thought this was justified because they were to play a scout role, and thus they had the view range to do so. This meant a light tank line was just a more complicated and convoluted way to get up a medium tank line, except for the American lights, which actually led to the artillery line. Yay! But this is resulting in some of the highest XP games ever recorded, because if you don't know, a tier 5 shooting a tier 10 earns them 50% experience bonus as a base, because for every tier you go, it adds 10%. So currently, if you're a tier 8 and you shoot a tier 10, that's 20% XP bonus. Back in the day, you could have a Chaffee, tier 5, shoot an IS-7. That's a 50% bonus to the base XP. That's why a lot of older players that are good at the game, their highest XP tanks are in some random tier 5 light from, 6 years ago. The FV4202 was originally a tier 10 British medium tank. Its stats can still be found on TanksGG, but it has no model. It was moved to tier 8 and made into a premium. You probably know about the artillery nerf. It was relatively recently. It was accompanied by the HE nerf, which pissed off a lot of old people because they couldn't sling HE out of their 60 TPs and E4s, and artillery had their original HE shells split into a stun shell and a damage shell, but this is not the first time artillery has had a big change like this. Artillery used to be scary instead of insufferable. For example, the T92 artillery did 2,250 damage with one shot, with 120mm of penetration. Its AP rounds had 1,800 damage at 370mm of penetration. This puts the shit barn to shame. It's absolutely brutal. The Object 261 was basically a shit barn that could hit you anywhere across the map.
Oh, that's really got to hurt.
The way it was balanced is that artillery had a massively longer aim time, way worse accuracy, and a longer reload, but their splash damage was almost non-existent. Whereas now, a shot could land on the other side of a building and still damage you. Back then, a shell would have to hit you directly, or land right next to you to do damage. Wargaming changed this so that artillery hits you for a lot less, but now stuns you, which was less punishing, but exponentially more annoying. Thankfully, consumables were now multiple use, so your medkit could fix your stun and would be off cooldown in 90 seconds, whereas previously the medkit and the repair kit were a one-time use only. So yeah, it was pretty brutal back then. There were many game modes that Wargaming created. Most of the time, Wargaming makes these modes to test new features that they want to implement. You remember the Chaffee races in 2019? Well, that was the second time they had Chaffee races. The first time was in 2014. I'm guessing they were testing the physics back then, because I don't know what else they'd be testing. But there were some other cool game modes, such as the 100 Years of Tanks mode, where they tested out wheeled vehicles. Frontline, where they tested out no team damage. Steel Hunter, may the 5-shot derp rest in peace, tested out field mods. Currently, the last Waffenträger and Nirni 13 are the only modes where Wargaming tested something that isn't currently in the game, which was weather and dynamic map changes.
Oh my gosh, 1v50, what a beast, what a beast.
There was also the Sturmtiger mode, which I think was created to test how high explosive works when dealing with large hit points and large calibers, but I don't know, it's just speculation. There were some much older modes, such as the IS 8-ball, which did actually test the new physics of the game, where you could flip finally, as opposed to being locked at 70 degrees. It had you drive a funny looking ball and the objective was to knock the enemy into a lava pit. There was the Karl game mode where you played as an 8-bit Karl artillery, and I have absolutely no idea what this was supposed to be testing, but it seemed to have been a success because they brought back the mode but with 3 different pixel tanks instead. They had a soccer game mode, which is Rocket League, but way slower and crappier. There was historical battles, where the game would try to emulate real-life battles, often putting some few Tigers and Panthers against a bunch of Shermans, or a Jagdtiger against a bunch of IS tanks. You couldn't even pick the ammo or gun you'd use, it'd be selected to be historically accurate for the time period. So yeah, basically everybody wanted to play the big fat German tanks, so the mode never really took off. Confrontation Battle was the mode where the entire team was comprised of tanks from a single nation. So for example, you'd only have Soviet tanks against only German tanks. It was removed the very next patch because the teams would be imbalanced. So yeah. Tank Company mode was sort of like Clan Wars, more specifically advances, but didn't require a clan. Anybody could just open up a team company and invite your friends or random players or whoever to fight other teams. And instead of playing at a specific tier, there would be a max tier limit point system. For example, Champion Tank Company, you could bring any tanks tiers 1 to 8, and the sum of all the tiers has to be less than or equal to 90. So you could bring 11 tier 8s and 1 tier 2 scout, or you could have 10 tier 8s and a KV2 and a tier 4 scout. The thinking was a tier 4 scout could beat a tier 2 scout, and a KV2 could still be useful at tier 8s. So, basically it was way more interesting. Another interesting fact about these mixed tiered battles is that the M53-55 tier 9 artillery was used in tier 10 battles because it was just better than all the other tier 10 artillery. Finally, one of the first dedicated modes was Rampage, which was just a one versus everybody mode. You had to complete a series of ridiculous missions in order to obtain the T26 tank. This was highly controversial because it was extremely easy to rig the matches, especially on the NA server. All you had to do was get a bunch of guys to queue up at the same time and you could all just rig the missions. Therefore, there was not a single T26 tank on the NA server that wasn't rigged. And the reason everybody wanted to rig the T26 was because it was just busted. It had incredible stats and incredible armor, and it was one of the few reward tanks that Wargaming actually nerfed. Let's move on to some quirks about maps. The blimp on Redshire says Ruinberg. There is a fully modeled sheep in a cave on Klondike. I don't know why, but there it is. It's also possible to climb up the slope and drop into the deep-ass mine on Klondike, or at least it used to be, but I couldn't do it myself. Wargaming put invisible walls everywhere. All these tables at this cafe on Himmelsdorf are reserved for Serb, who is the head of game design, so, you know, basically God. They're what looks to be a picture of some developers on both sides of the El Haluf map, as well as on Ruinberg, Glacier, and Fjords. Ruinberg has 2 paintings, but I was only able to find one of them, because strangely enough, the other one is located in an area that they recently changed, so I'm not sure if they relocated the painting or if it's just gone altogether. The AMX40 has a list of the developers inside it. The Scorpion G has a picture of a German actress in it, whereas the Archer has a picture of Winston Churchill. Speaking of the Archer, it goes backwards faster than it goes forwards. This is because the gun is actually mounted backwards. You can even see the headlights and viewports face the other way. So when you drive backwards, you're actually driving forwards. This is also true of the Crusader SP. The statue of Lenin on Ensk is not destructible, but the statue of Foch on Paris is. Nice one, Wargaming. The T7 combat car fires a machine gun instead of an autocannon, and it's literally just a Browning 50 cal, and it's the only tank to have a clip size of 50 rounds. There are many ways to get launched in the air in World Tanks history. You probably remember the T-57 Heavy's turret bug that was patched, but before that there was a few ways to get sent flying in the air. For example, on Pearl River you could have somebody ram into you while you were in the watermill. You know, push hard enough and you'll just be sent flying. There were a few other spots that would also do this. Also, on Himmelsdorf, you could just drive into some of the buildings, just, you know, straight through. I'm guessing there's some hitbox stitching misalignment or something, but yeah, just go inside, you can't get out, can't be shot, nothing. Also, on Ruinberg, you could take a small tank between the 2 buildings at this specific location, and it would just shoot you up to the top. A UE-57 was the perfect size where you wouldn't flip and you could actually just drive on top of the buildings and shoot people. If your tank has no ammunition, it cannot be ammo racked. You could platoon with any tier tank. A tier 10 could platoon with a tier 1. This was called field platoons, and it was fun because players thought that, you know, one tank would be the difference between a win or a loss and would lose their shit over it. The Barask has better accuracy with a damaged gun field mod, and the armorer skill. So that's kind of an oversight. Some tanks, like the T-54, had shells coming out from the gun mantlet, and tanks like the Jagdpanzer E-100 had a hitbox that extended past the rear, meaning if parked up against one, your shots would go right through them. There was also the French artillery. Its gun stuck out so far past the back of the tank that if you were to rub your butt against another tank and fire, the shell would come out inside that tank and pen them. Though I haven't found any evidence of this, and I find it hard to believe because a similar situation happens with the T-54 and you know, the E-100 hull, and the shell goes right through it. But nonetheless, this is a rumor that people talk about. There is a Sturmtiger in the now removed map Severogorsk. Speaking of removed maps, there was Dragon's Ridge, Hidden Village, Komarin, Mittengard, Northwest, Port, Sacred Valley, South Coast, Stalingrad, Swamp, and Windstorm. And there were also variants of maps already in the game, like Winter Himmelsdorf and Ruinberg on Fire. Those are removed maps, but there are a lot of cancelled maps. For example, there's a map that was going to be called Mexico or Texas. It was probably cancelled because it looks the same as steppes. Arizona or South America kind of looks like Pearl River. Savannah looks like another steppes type map. Rivertown kind of looks horrible because the whole map is limited to 3 choke points at the bridges. So Wargaming is gonna immediately get on making that one. Inca Road looks crazy, but again, has 2 choke points. There even is a video on this map. Smolensk kind of looks like the old Kharkov map before it was reworked. Detroit just looks like Himmelsdorf. There's also a video on this map as well. Big Ensk. There's actually a bigger version of the Ensk map that Wargaming for some reason doesn't plan on putting into the game. The video showing this map shows that it's basically empty. Big Ensk would be awesome though. I've taken a free cam outside the map borders to give you a feel of how it would look in the modern World of Tanks. So Wargaming, please add Big Ensk to the game, that'd be awesome. There was also this unknown map seen on the developer's computer. There were no limits to how many artilleries could be put into a game. Some games would have almost only artillery. This essentially meant that tanks with guns that do 2000 damage were shooting at tanks with 500 HP. The matchmaker was different too. Notice how one side gets 2 tier 10 heavies, while the other side gets nothing but tier 8 artillery. Wargaming tried to fix the matchmaker by making it a 3-5-7 format, as in 3 top tiers, 5 mid tiers, 7 bottom tiers. But what it did is pretty much make it so that you're never top tier. The M26A2E1, also known as the Mutant, and the MTLS1G14 were one of the rarest tanks that you could get. I'm sure you know about the M6A2E1 being a pre-purchase tank that you could get back when World of Tanks was relatively new, but you probably didn't know that it had the original M6 hull until the HD update, where they changed it to include the welded sheet in the front. The MTLS1G14 was also only available to special accounts and only on the NA server. You may also notice that tanks actually had horns back then.
Did you just hold it? How did you do that?
H.
Wargaming had a little thing where, like, for a week you could have a horn on your tank, and then they removed it. It was supposed to be like a, you know, a short temporary joke thing. But no, it was originally in the game, long time ago. I'm not sure why they removed it. Injured crew members got less experience at the end of the battle. Wargaming probably removed this because it's stupid. You used to be able to team kill artillery without penalty by putting your gun into their barrel, and when they fire, the shell that they just fired explodes in their face by hitting your barrel, killing them. You used to be able to rock your tank back and forth for more gun depression. The T1 LPC and the T95/FV4201 Chieftain have the same hull. If you ricochet off a tank, the shell keeps going and can damage another tank if hit. It can only ricochet once though, so you can't have a shot ping pong forever. Gold ammo used to cost actual gold, so it was only used in Clan Wars. Wargaming changed it to be purchasable with credits or gold, so you could switch between them, and then eventually just removing the option to pay with gold altogether. The T-18 and T-82 were originally tank destroyers, not artillery. The T-18 in particular was incredibly overpowered because it was fast, armored, and can one-shot most tanks at its tier. Think of it as a tier 2 version of the Object 268 version 4, with the 4005's gun, and a 7-second reload. The T95E2 is the tier 8 American medium tank that was only available through the old referral program, where if you convinced some poor bastard to start playing this game with you, and you linked your account with his, you would get this tank if the said new player reached tier 10. So, you know, this was obviously rigged. People would just make new accounts, link them up, and grind the account. The tank wasn't even that good anyway. It was more of just a collector's show-off tank. The Object 703-2 was originally going to have a 100mm gun, but Wargaming knew they would sell more if they gave it a 122mm gun. This is where it gets confusing though, because the Object 703 is just another name for the IS-3, which is just another name for the Kirovets 1. They are all the same tank, but not in World Tanks though. There is the Kirovets 1 tank, which is like a prototype IS-3 that Wargaming took the hull from, and then widened the turret, and made it into the 703-2. So yeah, that's interesting. The KV-4K TTS is a tier 8 premium tank destroyer that was originally supposed to be a Clan Wars reward tank, but was never added due to balancing reasons. Looks funky though. There's also some weird tanks you can find on Tanks GG, such as the K91 version 2, which is just the K91 tier 10 Russian medium with a turret in the middle. So tier 8 premium it is. The Wheezy 113-2 looks like it has the 113 hull, so a tier 10 heavy, combined with the Object 140's turret, a tier 10 medium. So logically, that would make it a tier 8 premium.
That makes sense to me.
Now, I'm gonna show you guys some stuff that you probably don't know about. A lot of these are taken from Darciel's forum post, as they have a fantastic list of this stuff. He's also Polish, so that's based. Did you know that the E100 originally had the option for 2 turrets? Currently he uses a Krupp turret, but it could also mount the mouse turret. I guess Wargaming decided against it because, well, if it had the mouse turret, it would just make the E100 a slightly faster mouse. The AMX M454 was already in the game as far back as 2011. Hell, it was even on the physical game cover. And in the trailer. I agree with Darciel's speculation that it was probably not added because it didn't really fit with the AMX 50B line. Speaking of French tanks, there were French super heavies in the game. That's right. The Japanese super heavy line was not the first line with mid-tier super heavies. In this screenshot, we can see as low as tier 4 had the FCM 2C. That's right, a tier 4 that weighed 69 tons. We can also see the FCM F1 at 139 tons at tier 6, and the 2C BIS. My guess is that Wargaming didn't add them because they would be pretty much impossible to balance out. Don't worry though, as the Japanese heavies are pretty much the same thing, and they're in the game, and they're all equally trash, so there you go. The T23 was a tier 8 medium before the T26 Pershing replaced it. It's even on Tanks GG, but has no model and has placeholder stats. The Brumbar was planned to be added, but it never was. Probably because a KV2 at tier 5, shooting at tier 3s, might not have been the best idea. Fun fact, if you misspell Brumbar in Google Translate, it'll say humpable. So yeah, there you go. The M54 Renegade was already in the game a long time ago. It's the M48A2/T54E2/T123E6. And it was a tier 10 medium. But there still exists a tier 8 heavy called the T54E2. I believe it later became the Renegade. Wargaming doesn't seem to know what they want it to be. It also appeared in the tech tree as a tier 9 that didn't require any other tanks to unlock. Like the modern collector's vehicle, it was the only time you could get it. The Panzer KV-1 was in the game files. I'm guessing it was a captured KV-1. Looking at the pictures, it seems to have been outfitted with a German gun. Either way, it seems to be just as forgettable as any other tier 5 premium tank. A new tech tree came out on April 1st. It showed tier 11 to 13 tanks. It seemed funny until you realized that most of the tier 11 to 13 tanks are in the game currently. At least the heavies are. Like the 430, 277, 279, 252. I guess they never really added these because, well, a 252 at tier 9 has better armor than the 277 at tier 11. Which doesn't make sense. Unless it's a premium at tier 8. Side note, check out the crossover lines between the branches. Back then, you could branch over to another line if you wanted. Like, check it out here, we can go from the German heavies to the tank destroyer line by branching across the Ferdinand. Or you could hop over from the British heavy to the tank destroyers to the clutch kill game carrier. Wargaming removed branches because they probably wanted you to grind the entire line instead of making strategic choices of what line you would grind up. That's probably why all the new tech tree tanks are trash until you reach tier 9 and 10. The T4485 was going to be a tier 7 Russian premium medium tank, but was later scrapped due to balancing issues. So instead they moved it to tier 8, named it the T44 Lightweight, and made it lighter by adding more frontal armor. This was also scrapped due to balancing issues. So they eventually replaced it with the LT432, which is just an Object 432 with a made-up turret, 7 degrees of gun depression, and better armor. That was deemed balanced. I think so. The T44-122 is also in the game, but it's only available to the developers. It's one of the rarest tanks still in the game that Wargaming haven't sold. Yet, you may know about the ISU-130, a tank that was once given to community contributors, before they sold it in the store. But I bet you didn't know about the VK-101P B, which is the same as the normal VK-101, but does 490 alpha instead of 440. It was also given to community contributors, but it was never playable because it's forever been stuck on the rental period has ended. The Spectator tank found in team training rooms is an MS-1. There are multiple chieftains in the game files. You can find them on Tanks GG. The two that aren't available are better in every way than the chieftain we have from Clan Wars, except their turrets are significantly weaker with bigger cupolas. I don't really know which one would be better or worse, but I mean, there you go. I mentioned earlier that the old World Tanks physics didn't allow you to rotate more than 70 degrees in freefall, but if we go even older than that, you could not even get off the ground. They were essentially glued in place, and you could not jump off ledges or anything. There were invisible walls preventing you from falling, probably because falling didn't exist in the game mechanic. But how funny is that? We went from invisible walls holding you in place, to brand new physics, allowing you to traverse anywhere you want, then back to the invisible walls holding you in place. So yeah. In addition to the 1.0 HD update, the rocks were made significantly more slippery, probably to prevent players from climbing into areas that they shouldn't on the new HD maps. Check out these images of the World of Tanks game files taken directly from the directory. A lot of tanks that were not in the game at the time are in the game now are on this list, like the British tanks. But check out this 32 PZ38 HF. Looks like it's got some rockets or something on it. There's also some other weird tanks. like the ACL 135, AMX 13, FL 11, and the big fat tanks I mentioned earlier. Look a little further down, and we can find the Sturmtiger and the Brumenbar. Ever heard of the E25, E50, E75, and E100? Well, there's also an E10 that was never added. It'd probably play the same as an E25 by the looks of it. The Matilda at Tier 4, that we all know and love, is the Mark III Matilda, but here it shows what looks like a Mark I Matilda. There's a T1 M1921, the M4 90V, which is a Sherman with a Pershing turret. They even had the T88, which is a Hellcat with a 105mm howitzer. RBT5, which appears to be a BT5 with rockets, and an IT-45, which looks like an actual cockroach, or a Soviet E-25. Then there's this. Basically, the most advanced Lithuanian tank. Seriously, imagine Wargaming talking about implementing wheeled vehicles, and then they start by adding this as a Tier 8 premium. I'd buy it. And you would too. Project Tank is a World of Tanks knockoff developed by a Chinese company, no surprises there, in 2013 that gained some moderate popularity due to how similar it was to World of Tanks.
The controls are exactly the same as in World of Tanks. Who am I kidding? It is World of Tanks. He has at least written new maps. Here we are, Moscow.
To the point where Wargaming actually tried to sue them, but unlike Skill for LTU's lawsuit, this had some merit to it because the developers, called Diving In Studio, literally stole World of Tanks assets and put it into their game. And they thought they would get away with it too. They even stole tanks that didn't exist. Meaning, it's not just a funny coincidence, they really did steal the intellectual property from Wargaming. I think they're gone now because searching Project Tank leads to a different game on Steam made in 2018, so my guess is the game is long gone. I, for one, am devastated because for a moment you could play a World of Tanks game that was made by not Wargaming, and instead was made by a shady Chinese company. I don't know what's worse. Order of War is a strategy game made by Wargaming in 2009. Look familiar? Yep. This is basically the precursor to World of Tanks. You can even still play Order of War today. They even are currently developing a game mode in World Tanks called Order of War, which sort of has the same vibe to it, I guess. But yeah, I mean, look at this. Old World of Tanks uses the exact same textures and buildings and everything. They even have the same sounds too. So, World of Tanks was originally an RPG, as in role-playing game. Yeah, they even joked about this in the first video ever made about the game on Wargaming's Russian YouTube channel. It supposedly was supposed to be like any other RPG, except it was with tanks. And apparently it was a mobile game if the video is anything to go by. It's kind of good that they switched to an MMO with just tanks, as according to Wargaming, the World of Tanks project was one of the most expensive games. Not the most expensive game they ever made, but the most expensive game ever in the CIS region. So like a budget of $50, I guess. The company's CEO, Victor Crisley, stated, and quote, "We literally ran out of money, and I mean it. There is nothing left. Absolutely nothing. Zero. My mum even ripped up a pillowcase and gave me everything that had been saved for a rainy day." And apparently, they must still be out of money considering Wargaming's business decisions. This is all I've collected. There are many more little nuances I left out, because if I didn't, this video would be hours long. I've tried to present the most interesting facts I could. I most definitely did miss a bunch, But hopefully you were entertained, and nonetheless, thanks for watching. Oh, right! There's still one more just incredible fact about this game, and it's that if you just stop being shit, your stats will go up. No, wait, no, that's not the right one. What's the... all vets are bad at the game, and the more vets you have, the more chance you're gonna lose. That's true, but that's not... Oh, right. I almost forgot. How could I forget such a thing? As the classic Pucklo would say, artillery is, in fact, unfair and broken. Thanks for watching. And fuck off.